planning your post-pandemic comeback. I know we're all ready. We got buckle up because I know that they're about to drop a lot of knowledge here. So Erica Cobb is a seasoned television host and social commentator who is currently a co-host at Tanga's Daily Blast Live, DBL, the only national daytime talk show airing live in all time zones. Erica also hosts her own weekly podcast called Come Back with Erica Cobb, which airs on all major social platforms, and lives at www.comeback.tv, where Erica's motto is, everyone is deserving of the comeback they are willing to earn. Erica's social justice and entertainment commentary has introduced more than 58 million unique viewers to Daily Blast Live on social media. It's earned her nods from celebrities like Gabrielle Union, guest co-hosting spots on podcasts like rapper T.I.'s Expeditiously, and made Erica a highly requested moderator for panels on a variety of hot social topics. In November 2020, Erica was honored as a trailblazer in news and journalism by Black women in media. Welcome, Erica. Erica will be joined in conversation today by PowerToFly's president and co-founder, Katherine Zaleski. Katherine Zaleski was named one of Fast Company's most creative people in business after launching PowerToFly, the platform fast-tracking economic equality through upskilling and connecting underrepresented talent to roles in high visibility sectors. PowerToFly assisted 2 million people who came to the platform last year in 2021 through job opportunities, networking, and virtual events across the world's largest employers. Prior to co-founding PowerToFly, Katherine was the founding manager editor of Now This, the executive director of digital for the Washington Post, and the sixth hire and head of news for the Huffington Post. She writes currently for major publications, including the New York Times, Fortune, Forbes, and Quartz, and has appeared on Today, Good Morning America, and numerous outlets. Katherine lives in New York with her family, where she is a term member of the Council of Foreign Relations and a frequent kite surfer on Long Island and New Jersey's underappreciated beaches. I'm passing the mic to both of you. Thank you so much for closing out today's summit, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot with you all. Take it away.
Thank you. Thank you so much for keeping up the energy. I'm going to get some questions in here from everybody. That's going to be passed over from the chat, so keep them coming. And I want to take a quick moment before I go into speaking with Erica here to thank everybody for joining the second day of this summit. All the work you do, Erica, around accountability, and all the participants. So thank you for showing up and sharing with us today. And I'll reiterate something I said yesterday, and I mentioned to Erica in the green room that in the past week, we were held accountable for some inequitable practices by a fellow speaker. We want to thank Dr. Sam Ray again for the work you do daily, and reiterate that we'll make it our duty to continue to grow and educate ourselves so that we are mission aligned. And that's what I'm here for with this conversation with Erica. I want to hear about the work she's doing to bring people back through this pandemic. We're obviously I'm sitting here in New York City, where we're getting out of the Omicron strain, and you're seeing obviously people having very, very different experiences. And so, Erica, I'd love if you could speak a little bit to the work you're doing here with helping vulnerable communities with this, and not only that, but also what other people need to know about it, and how more people can really come in and help and be better supporters.
Well, thank you, Katherine. I appreciate you all having me here today. And as we know, not just this moment is really, the past couple of years have been the catalyst to what this moment truly can become. So as we all do this work in very real time, the commitment to transparency is very much appreciated, because as we all know, that if we don't know the history, if we don't know what we're coming back from, then we're destined to repeat the same practices. So having the conversation is always going to be the catalyst for change. So I really appreciate that. In terms of my work with Comeback or my work on air at Daily Blast Live, what I've really been committed to, much in the same vein of my mother, who is a professor emeritus. She just retired from DePaul University, where she taught for 25 years. And she really taught me how to model, in terms of what things look like for a comeback season, or just figuring out a way to get yourself out of situations where you are marginalized, situations of oppression, situations where you just aren't given the same resources as everyone else. So in addition to my social commentary, which is a very small part of what I consider my mission to be on daily national television, I decided last year to really go more into the work that I was doing with court appointed special advocates, that's CASA, for abused and neglected children, because the recognition in my world was about what the next generation is coming into, and how to perhaps help children to grow into productive people, but also be open to the resources that their peers who aren't of color have really been afforded. So I've spent the past year doing that work, more boots on the ground, whereas before I was doing it in a more orator stance. But this past year has taught me a lot about that. I really changed my mission in terms of how I was doing my comeback podcast, to make the excellence of specifically Black women, but really people who are allies and also other people of color, to give them a space to be unapologetic in their excellence and be more of an inspiration to the listeners. So a couple of those things combined have really been where my work has focused over the past 2 years.
I mean, yeah, you have amazing videos. If anybody goes to comeback.tv, one of which you also talk about your mother too, and how she really got you to, there's a video that you did about hair that I'm going to show my daughter, which I thought was fantastic. And you talk about your mother in there as well. So people should go check out those videos by all means. Since we're talking more specifically about coming back out of this pandemic, speak a little bit so that everybody understands, when you're talking about the pandemic, how it disproportionately affected the Black community and Black women in this case.
Yeah, so as we all know, this has been an evolution in very real time, and people have handled it in the best ways that they've known how. But since the very beginning, we all knew that the pandemic was disproportionately affecting the Black community due to resources, and of course, the housing situation, as terms of us being closer in proximity together. Then that turned into it affecting the Black community in terms of the disproportionate ways that they were addressed by medical professionals compared to other communities. And then that went into the idea that there were a lot of Black women who weren't able to work from home. They were put on the front lines, and either they weren't able to do that or they weren't able to keep their jobs. So that changed a lot as well. Now that we're fast forwarding to, post-vaccine, we also know that there is a significant percentage of the Black community who don't believe in taking the vaccine. So we continue to have these conversations. And as a result, especially when we look back in the past 2 years, how many people we have lost. Like, it is no surprise to me that when I look around just in the studio of my peers, of my colleagues, I lost a total of 4 people during the pandemic, where most people didn't lose anyone, or they didn't experience it the same way. And so when we're talking about coming back in a post-pandemic world, we're really talking about reevaluating how we're doing things and how we're moving. I do talk about my mother a lot because she has always been very much dedicated to the cause of amplifying the voices, especially of what was considered the lower quartile. So she does a lot of work. Or Bob Moses, who just passed away, who was a part of the Algebra Project, major civil rights leader. She works side by side with him, and she's continuing to push that mission forward. So when I have conversations with her over the past 2 years, it's really been about how do we allow for circumstances for Black women, but Black community, lower quartile communities, to have resources available for not only the education aspect, but also for the idea that we can bring job opportunities into the home. So that's really where I've been speaking from. I was able to grow my business over 65% during the pandemic, but that's also because of the idea that I had already had a personal pandemic, so to speak, in my life a decade before.
Mm. Wow. The well, first of all, you're getting a lot of love in the chat, so I just want you to keep on going. I'm sorry if I butcher your name. Divine Loving says, Erica Cobb, I just want to say I watch you on DBL every day, capital letters. Absolutely love your transparency on the show and how you look at situations. So happy to see you as a part of the summit.
Thank you.
And then we have a question from Joseph Ogita. And again, I apologize and if I'm mangling your name. This is a question that's, I'll try to paraphrase it a little bit, but he says, which are some of the myths and assumptions you would wish to be rectified within our societies in regard to what we've all undergone collectively? Excuse me, I didn't paraphrase it, I just read it. But I think it is important to recognize the myths and assumptions as we have this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, where do you really start? Because here's I'm not going to say I'm reluctant to answer that question, but I do want to kind of dissect that question, because when the pandemic first started, we were in this very idealized assumption that we were all in the same boat. And then it's like, no, some of us are on paddle boards and some of us are on yachts. I think one of the biggest myths is that switch didn't happen. There were people who started off on paddle and boogie boards who are now very much on their way to a yacht. And also vice versa. A lot of people lost their livelihood. So not everyone suffered during the past 2 years. Also, the idea that we're all in this together. We really have to be more honest about how all of us, no matter what group we find ourselves or fall or identify as being in, that we were never truly in this together, because I think what we're showing right now by the lack of conversation, nuanced conversation, by the lack of flexibility of thought in some of these situations, is that we have a real issue here. Some people never experienced someone who got sick, never got sick. Other people did. Some people, lost people. Other people didn't. Some people lost their jobs, other people thrived during this. So when we're having these conversations, just being more honest that everyone was never in the same boat and we continue to be isolated by our respective vessels.
So we have a lot of employers on PowerToFly who have, sorry, I don't know why I'm holding a kid's toy. But they have good intent, but the impact is not there. And almost if you could pretend with me as an employer, and I am an employer, I'm hiring a lot of people, what would your advice be to someone who's going out there and interviewing, obviously a diverse slate of candidates, trying to bring in as many people as possible from different backgrounds? It's a very specific question, but some advice here on people's experiences and how to address that even in the interview process, or even when you're looking at people's resumes.
I think really it comes down to respecting the pipeline, because we have to look at, in certain industries, we don't have the representation necessarily coming up the pipeline because we aren't really taking care of the educational aspects or the entry or the barrier to entry from the beginning. When you look at what your interns look like, is that representing the diversity that you would like for your company to look like? When we're talking about actually nurturing the relationships and being very clear, one thing that I have a lot of conversations about with my respective peers is the idea that we have people with a lot of potential, the same amount of potential as in a marginalized community as the majority, as people who aren't of color. Right. But we don't necessarily have the modeling happening. We don't necessarily have the resources being poured into these people. A lot of times, especially in situations where, you know, I'm second generation in terms of my parents being like business professionals, you know, in terms of my grandparents, you know, my dad was born in a one-room shack with no floors, no electricity. So his come up in his life has been substantial. My mother had modeling a little bit more with her mother, but when it comes down to it, I learned everything I knew, what was appropriate, what wasn't appropriate, what was the resources that I needed in order to be a productive young adult, to be a productive business person. I
Right.
had that within my family. I also had it within the circles that they were putting me in, but not everyone has that. So when you have a candidate or multiple candidates who are of a lot of potential, that's the reason why they're being brought on as interns. They're being brought on as people who you see can be cultivated and brought up in your network within your corporation. We need to be mindful that there might have to be an extra step exerted in order to make sure that they have all of the resources that they need for success.
Yeah. No, it's 100% true. I mean, I remember when I was coming up in the internship world, all internships were free and nobody understood the implications of that. And here we are 20 years later. And so obviously, you know, there's been pushes to change that, but especially in news, I mean, internships are a big part of it. What about also digitization or digital training, so more mid-career? PowerToFly does more mid-career work, and we have a lot of upskilling, but you know, the question is even reaching out to different groups around certain skills and what companies can do to really transition someone from a role where they would be going into the office to one where they could work from home.
Well, first of all, I think that really evaluating that work from home or hybrid piece is still very important. I know a lot of businesses, companies lost a lot of great candidates because they found the ability to work from home something that was going to be economically pleasing to their families, especially when you're talking about folks who have children.
Yeah.
I think when we're looking at, especially there's always this like progression where it's like, you know, you go from intern, and I was also an unpaid intern for many years, 20 years ago. So I understand that battle. But when you go from intern to entry level, that's a very different jump from when you're going from, you know, mid-level to the C-suite.
Right.
And when we're having those conversations, those are also about relationships. And the truth is, a lot of people are more comfortable making relationships with people who have common backgrounds, common interests. So being mindful that when you offer opportunities to one person based on what you know about them organically, that
Right.
you're also being mindful to know just a little bit more about the candidate who might be next to them to assure that perhaps that opportunity might also be appropriate for that person, or if it's not appropriate for that person, think about why that may be, because the genesis of why it may not be appropriate for a person of color or a minority group might have to do with the way that your foundation, the way that your corporation is structured and who it's structured for. So we're not talking about just putting minority groups or candidates into certain positions. We're also talking about changing the culture as we do that. If your employees are a part of your culture, then there should be a piece of them that's reflective of the greater whole.
Yeah, I think one of our advisors said on this summit last year that her boss kept telling her that she should be playing more golf and taking more golf lessons, and she said, "Well, I don't get invited to the golf, so it's like you can give these pieces of advice to women all the time and to Black women, but it's if you're not actually including them, and we see that time and time again. So
Exactly.
something to that I try to, you know, I remind myself of, and we try to remind everybody else within our community as well, especially as they hire. Well, what's coming up on on your show, on your podcast. I mean, I know that your daily show is a little bit more based on breaking news, but
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
have a lot of great guests on Comeback TV. It's amazing. I was really enjoying
Thank
it
you.
earlier.
I did want to add to that golf piece as well, because I was in a long-term relationship with someone who was a golf course superintendent. And one thing that I was just very acutely aware of is anytime golf, which is a trigger for me, not because it has to do with an ex, but golf is always a trigger for me because I was very much aware that some of the places that I now had access to, my father, who's only 30 years older than me, did not.
Mhm.
So golf always kind of like makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, because it really does show an inability to connect the timeline of what's happened in American history and how important that truly is. There are still golf courses that would not allow me to come on to their course. I feel very like, and I say this because I had like a different path of entry to have all of this access, but because I had all of the access, I realized how uncomfortable I would have been if I hadn't accessed golf courses in that way. So when we're having golf is always like a number one,
Yeah.
thing, like, because it's so obvious, it's where business has been done for so long, but also we never really think about why business was done for so long in a place that wasn't accepting of everyone, that in a place that was very homogenized, and that is a part of the power structure in order to keep the power very invested in one community. So I just had to speak to that because that was a big part of my life for 10 years. And it's something that I like to just kind of remind people of, that you don't even realize necessarily that it's a bigger problem than just a game of golf. So that's something I just wanted to throw out there. But
Yeah.
in terms, yeah, but thank
Oh,
you. So,
well, no, I wanted to say thank you for sharing that. And there are a lot of institutions like that in the United States. Many of them golf clubs.
mhm.
Some of them are not here in New York. And it's amazing to me that they can still exist. And um, it's part of what needs dismantling overall. So
Right, right. And I'm not against golf. I mean, I don't golf.
no, yeah.
I think I I think I probably do it more so just as like, a stand than anything else. But yeah, if we were having this conversation about what was happening on the basketball court, it might be a completely different conversation, but it's very intentional. And so I just always want people to be mindful of that.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that more in context. Thank you.
Yes.
So yeah, we only have 2 minutes. We're gonna get kicked
Yes.
off. So give us a tease of what's coming up next.
So I actually have a major announcement coming up about Comeback with Erica Cobb, and I wish I could share it with you, but go to my social media. I will be sharing it on Tuesday. And really what I want people to think about, and that's at Erica Cobb, is the comeback never stops. It's very much in real time. And as I'm having this community of folks like yourselves who are getting ready and staying ready for their next chapter, I'm a part of that community. Everyone who listens to my podcast, I consider an accountability partner. So as I grow, my hope is that you're growing in real time and taking these nuggets of wisdom and inspiration from experts and celebrities and testimony teachers in their respective field, because it's all about the accountability of making a comeback together, about the life that you truly authentically want to live.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
Thank you.